All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Board of Finance for Fairfield, Connecticut's May meeting. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I'm going to ask our Budget Director, Mrs. Linda Gardner, to lead us in the pledge tonight.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to ask everybody to stay standing for a moment. Since our last meeting, unfortunately, the town lost a person, Mr. Bill Sapone, who spent a fair amount of time working for the town in a free capacity on many different building committees. And Bill, we were lucky enough to have Bill appear before our board during the many years I've been here, as well as others. And he gave freely of his time, his talents, and his passion to the town. And all taxpayers and citizens of the town owe him a great debt of gratitude. I'd like to hold a moment of silence in his memory and extend our sympathies and wishes to his family. Thank you very much. All right, tonight's agenda includes the setting of the mill rate for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2016. Mr. Mayor is here to walk us through that. And it also includes a series of presentations by the Director of Public Works related to some grant funding that's available to us for some public works projects that we will be discussing. Does anybody have any questions on the agenda tonight? Comments or concerns? Seeing none, we'll go right into the main event, which is to consider and set the mill rate for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2015 and ending June 30th, 2016. Do I have a motion to put that before us? Mr. Brown, second. Mrs. Leclerc. That item is now before us, and I'll turn the floor over to Mr. Mayor so you can walk us through it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. You've all got the handout. You get this every year, the night of the meeting. Some familiarity with it from the former staff. Started this like 3 years ago. The idea is to just put everything on a piece of paper, show the support for where we are and what we're doing, and when it makes sense. One of the documents that we had in the past was a risk analysis. If there were issues that were we were concerned about or we had cushion. And that analysis this year, kind of there's pluses and minuses, but it comes out to there are no major concerns or issues about where we are with respect to the amount of dollars needed. There's no cushions and there's no risks that are major that are not offsetting. So going through Schedule A, you see the RTM approved budget, $291,219,733. We reduced from that the non-current year tax revenue, fees, state revenue, prior year taxes, the estimates thereof, and we get to a tax revenue requirement of $163,126. We deduct from that the credits and reserves. We have senior tax relief, state elderly and disabled, assessment appeal issues and concerns. That's an easy one this year. This is the fourth or the fifth year before our next evaluation. Next year, that will be a very tricky and difficult number to deal with. The overpayment credits, those represent overpayments that are not carried as a liability in our general fund, but they're carried kind of like a liability on the tax rolls, so those will have to be paid back. Then we have the reserve for uncollected. We'll get into what that number in a little while, showing a total required tax levy of $273,883,267. The property available for assessment, based upon the final BA net grand list, $7 billion. Now, you remember last year, we didn't have that final number until almost a week before this meeting, or a couple days before this meeting, but after the RTM meeting. This year, we adjusted our processes to get that number early. So last year, there was confusion a little bit because the initial tax rate levy change was based upon the preliminary BAA grand list. This is the final, has been the final, it's been out there, it's the number that this year went before the RTM, so there's no adjustments like there were last year. That gives us a required mill rate for fiscal year 2016 of 24.80, which is a 1.64% change from the prior year. I'm not going to go into Schedule B, the next page. It basically lays out the detail, some broader numbers than what I've spoken to. It's got the budget, 2015 budget, 2016 RTM, recommended budget, and then the changes from this year to the last.
Before you go any further, thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Mayor on Schedule A or Schedule B? And some of them might be answered by the subsequent schedules, correct? But I just want to take a moment here.
And there's so much detail I could go into, so if you have questions, please ask.
So,
I might not get there.
Mr. Mayor, the first question is, so this board voted on revenue as well as the expenses. Are the revenue numbers, since we just got this schedule tonight, are the revenue numbers that you've listed in fees and services and other state revenue in the prior year taxes, are those the same as what we voted on several weeks back?
Those are A, the same that were voted on, and B, that have been scrutinized.
Okay.
And there's no concerns or risks that have showed up.
Okay.
Examined the budget, revisited with the department heads, went through a whole analysis. Everybody's still firm with the numbers.
So they're the exact same that we voted on when we accepted this?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have the calculation, the town senior tax relief? Do we have any concerns there? There's been questions, comments about that in prior years?
The numbers are in, and there's an $11,000 difference between the assumption and the actual.
Higher
I don't
or lower?
remember which way it is.
Okay, I mean, it's immaterial? It's higher?
Higher.
New projections
Higher, $11,000.
Okay. So it's basically immaterial?
Correct.
Okay. The overpayment credits, so those are taxes that have been collected previously. People have overpaid, you'll list those, you'll attempt to pay those back. So you're listing that as a liability that has to come out of the funds?
Correct. That's the estimate that will be there on June 30th.
Okay. You mentioned the assessment appeals. Do we have many that are still in the pipeline or anything going on there? I understand the comment of it being several years ago, but.
Yeah, no, like I said, this year's an easy year, there's only two.
Okay.
Only two outstanding in the courts.
Okay.
Next year, this November, we'll issue the revised, the new revalve. So next year will be a big activity year. There'll be a lot of discussion,
A lot of court
work
cases,
on
a
that
lot of.
number.
Right.
A lot of estimates.
This year
Next
was
3 years.
relatively simple and it hasn't moved
Relatively
around.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, feel comfortable with those numbers.
Okay. Reserve for uncollected, what's your collection rate, and has it changed since we talked about it?
Go to Schedule C.
Thank you, sir.
A little bit of introduction here. The town has heard collection rate numbers in the past. The current tax collector came to work for us in 2012, and as I was looking at the numbers and trying to reconcile and understand the prior numbers, I won't say that the prior year numbers were incorrect, but they include, the collection rate included in the numerator overpayments. So the numbers that you have, like the higher numbers you have from like the 99 point whatever, 98.84, 98.85, those are a little bit skewed because the numerator included overpayments. We have taken the overpayments out of this, and this is These numbers are based upon the actual collection rates without those collections in there, because they don't belong as part of the collection amount. They're not the real collected amount. Is that clear at all a little bit?
Yeah, okay,
You do
so-
a good job of helping me describe things, Tom.
So what you're saying is the collections that we just talked about that are on there for $326,000 that we owe back, those types of items were included in the original collection rate, even though they represent a liability to the town
Correct.
and need to be paid out.
Correct.
Okay. Question on that. Thank you for that. And we have the collection rate history there.
So the fiscal
Has that
year-
been restated?
These are based upon actual collection rates, based upon actual net collections.
So these are restated?
These
So
are-
these are
yes.
net of that issue?
Correct, correct.
Okay. Does anybody have a question on that? Mr. Walsh?
This uncollected, this new way you're doing it, is that the way every other town in Fairfield County is doing it?
I have no idea, but it's the right way to do it.
Okay. How's everybody else doing it?
I have no idea, like I said, but it's the right way. It's kind of like you're a lawyer, you have bills. You have receivables, you have billings of $100,000. Someone that owes you $50,000 pays you $51,000. So you owe him $1,000. The old way, you would have said to the world, let's make the number different, let's make that 51,000, 70,000. The former way, you would have said to the world, I've collected 70% of my receivables, but you haven't. You've only collected 50%. You owe that other $20,000 back. That $20,000 does not belong in the enumerator. It's inappropriate, it's an adjustment, so we exclude it. Your real number is 50%, and this is the real number.
I presume there's metrics that we compare ourselves to other towns, is this one of them?
You may,
Well, no, Bob, you, don't say I may.
well, you may, I don't know.
There's metrics that this town compares themselves to. And now I'll ask the first selectman, are there not metrics that we compare ourselves to other communities?
We've got a number of studies. There are a number of ratios and statistics that we look at across different towns. In this case, for each of the studies, and one of the reasons that, as we're talking about the uniform chart of accounts,
Yep.
and using that across different towns, so we start to get accurate comparisons in terms of what those are. When we compare to other towns, we can look at police or fire and compare what we do for other towns. It's not always clear whether their first responders are included in police or fire when we look at numbers. So if you see a big difference, your first question is, what else is going on there? In this case, these numbers are relatively close together, so you might not think right away. You might say, hey, I'm going to pick on Darien because I believe they have one of the higher collection rates. And I don't remember the number off the top, so that is a guess at this point. But I wouldn't know the details of what they're doing. That next level down, as you pointed out, you'd have to actually go back to them and ask to see how they calculate that, to be sure on how they're doing it.
Do we have to supply any of these metrics to like CCM or any of these, this kind of number?
Well, we supply all these numbers back, but I don't believe, and then I'm going to have to go back to Bob and say what the instructions are that each CFO is given in terms of supplying those numbers. All right? But this is part of an ongoing effort to make sure that the numbers we look at are, and forgive the expression, closer to real. And I don't mean it, that's not casting aspersions on anything before. It's just as we clean it up. Tom, I think you would agree that this gives you a more accurate reflection of what the real collection rate is. So as we plan ahead, we're not planning on overpayments, we're planning on what real collections are.
So I agree with that statement. In proper accounting parlance, what you would do is you would reclassify this cash as a liability. And you would put it on the other side and say, that cash is not available to us to pay any expenses. It's essentially not our money. It's the money that belongs to the taxpayer who overpaid it. So you would separate that out from not only the collection rate, but you'd separate it out from operations so that you didn't use that money to fund operations.
Correct.
I don't know, to be honest, it's an interesting question.
Well, I
Do we have
just
to
had the opportunity while Mike was at the podium to speak with our tax collector, who also happens to be the most recent past president of the Connecticut State Tax Collectors Association,
Yeah.
who informed me that the way we're doing it is the way that it's taught, but that some tax collectors like doing it the other way because it makes them look better.
Yeah, I can understand that. But let me ask you a question. Do you, how do we do it on the, how's it reflected on the town's balance sheet at the end of the year? Do you have to reclass it as a liability?
We, it's kind of like an off-statement liability, off-the-books liability, because, the true collection is recorded properly. The overstatements, it's not in the general fund.
Right. It should be in the footnotes.
So it's...
Any other questions?
Yeah, the
Ms.
reason
Wells?
I'm just asking, I mean, I don't care, I mean, it compares apples to apples because you went back and we can look at it, whatever, it's just, I just want to make sure that,
Yeah.
this is like Major League Baseball. One team can't be having a different slugging percentage than how they calculate slugging percentage for somebody else.
Right.
And, I'm just trying to see what the norm
That's
is.
fair.
And what our tax collector seems to be saying is that this is the way that it should be done. So that's all I really need to hear. But I presume that CCM, when they track a zillion different categories, this is probably one of them. And what I'm hearing is that different towns do it different ways, so you really can't compare them. So, which makes your data bad.
This is one of the reasons for the recent state effort to have a common chart of accounts,
Mhm.
to have comparability among towns and cities. So looking at this, so you can see that fiscal year 14 actual is 98.72. As of April 30th, 2015, we are running a little bit behind that, and we can, not behind that number, where our collection rate April 30th, 2015 is a few basis points behind our collection rate of April 30th, 2014.
What's the number, do you know?
Well, it's
Cindy probably knows.
it's not a 98.72 number, it's like 97 point something, because we've got 2 months to go.
Yeah, I'm just saying, what's the comparison? Year over year, what's you said it's a few basis points. What are we
Yeah,
talking?
it's about 10 basis points difference.
I got a question.
Yes, please, Mr. Matola.
This may sound like a stupid question, but on Schedule C, what's the purpose of these other
I'm getting there.
numbers? Okay.
Thank you.
It wasn't a stupid question.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have used, so basically, and remembering also that the mill rate only goes out to tens of thousands, so since you can only go out to tens of thousands, you can't like pitch a collection rate of 98.67 or 98.68. There's always going to be a gap. When you go to the next mill rate, it's going to generate what that uncollected rate is. So what you have here is 7 collection rates based upon increasing, as you notice in the left-hand column, it's a .0001 change in the mill rate. So we have gone with the 98.67 because we're lagging a little bit from the prior year, and economy is still not super strong. You could go to a 90 if you wanted to. If you wanted to say no, we like the 98.72 better, then you'd go to the 24.79, and that'd give you 98.71. So this is just a range where you can go in the last column is the impact on the median homeowner.
And it's about $110,000 difference.
It's about $110,000 each way.
Gotcha.
Correct statement. And the median homeowner appraised value is $500,000, assessed value of $350,000.
So, Mr. Mayor, if we went to the 24.79, which is a 98.71%, we'd still be below the fiscal year 2014.
Still be below fiscal year 2014 and ahead of where we're trending today.
Well, what are you projecting your collection rate's going to be today, then?
I am projecting that the collection rate today for this year is going to be somewhere between like the 98.63 to 98.69, something like that. Because I've been watching it on a monthly basis, and it jumps up and down. It's like healthcare.
Questions? Mr. Walsh?
maybe this has to, maybe Cindy can answer this, I'm not sure. Where are we lagging? Is it real estate, commercial property, is it cars, is it personal property? Where are we lagging?
Yeah, I didn't bring that sheet with me. Do you have your May sheet? Your sheet? Real estate is lagging. Motor vehicle is ahead. Supplemental motor vehicle is ahead, and personal property is ahead.
So how far is real estate lagging as of May 5th?
90% collection rate, May 5, 2014, and 97.42 this year, 97.22.
Do you break that out by commercial property and residential property?
No, sir, do not have that here.
Have you looked at that, Cindy?
Real estate doesn't, in our system,
Yeah.
doesn't differentiate,
Yeah.
so that I can't, it doesn't have a code that can separate it
Mhm.
from commercial.
Yeah, we've talked about trying to figure out some way to do it, but it's one of those things that, other than asking the questions and knowing it'd be nice, haven't been able to make the second step. Be a conversation with QDS. And
Do you have any thought, either one of you, about the reasons why real estate's lagging behind? And I'm not asking you to guess, I mean, I guess, do you have some thought process of why that is?
I think it's a little bit the economy, and if you noticed also, one of the advantages of it lagging a little bit, your prior year collections.
Well, that's
go up.
exactly where I was just going to say.
Okay, and when your prior year collections go up,
Yeah.
you also get that 18% interest. So it's not a bad thing, and like when we meet Tuesday, I think it's Tuesday,
Yeah.
quarterly review, you'll see that our prior year collections, year-to-date, are 2.440 million, and our budget is like about 2.0,
Right.
and our interest is up as well.
See, you just went exactly where I was going to go, is that if it's light this year a little bit, you're going to collect that,
Right.
right? So you have some give in that for next year, quite frankly, if you're light this year.
Right.
So potentially going down, taking this down a notch, in other words, the tax rate increase, if we were to go with the 1.6 as opposed to the 1.64 for the 100,000 differential, if in fact we come in a little bit light this year, your opportunity for that prior year levy is more.
The budget for prior year taxes is like 2 million.
It's pretty flat, yeah.
Right.
Right, and you're running ahead of that, and your collection rate is a
Correct.
little bit down this year.
Correct.
So the odds of it going up next year.
Or staying. with
What's the
this.
typical aging? Do you have an aging of, so when people don't pay their taxes, right? If we assume that we're gonna be light this year, a little bit, right? People don't pay their taxes, are they paying them next year, or are they paying them?
Majority of them will pay them next year.
Right, so a little bit of softness this year gives us a little bit of upside next year,
Correct.
plus the 18% interest.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions on this, Mr. Walsh? Okay.
And
Thank you for the explanation, Mr. Mayor. What else would you like to point out on this?
Schedule D just shows you the appraised value of a range of homes of between $350,000 appraised value and $1,250,000 appraised value, the assessed value, and the at the 1.64% rate, which was the recommended rate, shows the tax levy increase for homes in those price ranges. So if you go to the second column from the right, for example, a $350,000 appraised value, $245,000 assessed value home would have a $98 increase in their tax levy for the tax year.
Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns from anybody? Anything you'd like to follow up on? Mr. Mayor, anything we haven't asked that we should ask?
Well, no, just the next page, just because this is very important,
Yeah.
just shows where we are, what's in the budget. At the fiscal year 16, it shows that If we come in on budget, one of the items in the budget is the contribution to surplus.
Yep.
There's $650,000 in the budget, and that would bring us from what's projected, if we come in on budget this year, 7.52% of general fund expenditures to 7.65% general surplus over fund balance, over fund expenditures.
And we're talking about our projection for year end at our meeting next week, correct?
Yes.
This is an advanced preview, any reason to believe it's materially different than what we talked about?
It is a very tight budget, but we're looking okay.
What's the change, the reason for the change in the negative change in the fund balance? Did we not put enough into, budget enough into
In 15, yeah, we only budgeted
500?
500,000.
And that wasn't enough to stay whole.
Correct statement.
Correct. We need like 600
Correct.
approximately? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Board members, anything else? If not, with no comments, Mr. Mayor, how would you feel if we took this down to a 1.6% tax rate increase and set the mill rate at 24.79 in light of our discussion on the prior year tax levy?
Two comments on that.
Sure.
One, this board is used to seeing some big surpluses in the prior years.
Yeah.
Some of them have been fortuitous, most of them have been fortuitous, some of them have been because of departmental cushions, if you will,
Right.
in the budgets. The administration has attempted to delete all those departmental cushions. So the
Shocking.
budget is tighter, and we've done this year over year, so we have a fairly tight budget. This current year, a couple of negatives, right? Snowstorms, we had the unfortunate incident or situation with the IT licensing, et cetera. So the combination of those two is like $1 million. But we've worked to make up for that in various ways. Plus, we've had some very serendipitous increases, unfortunate because of the town's growth, et cetera, on the revenue side. So we're going to probably, so we will, the way it's looking right now, we'll definitely come in with a net plus. So that's the first comment. The second comment, having looked at all the various at-risk and potential strengthening issues going forward next year, I said earlier that, they kind of average out, but it's a little bit on the positive side. So I have no problem with that at all.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If there's no other questions or comments, and everyone's acceptable, I'd like to make a motion. Well, does anybody want any discussion before I make a motion? Seeing none, I'd like to make a motion that we set the mill rate at the 24.79, which represents a 1.6% tax rate increase. Do I have a second to my motion? Mr. Mottola. That motion is now before us. Do we have any discussion on that? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote on that. All in favor of setting the mill rate at 24.79 or a 1.6% tax increase year over year? Opposed? Abstentions? That motion carries. So we've set the tax rate. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to make two comments, if I may, before I sit down.
Sure.
I want to thank Linda Gardner, definitely, but also the entire finance department. There's a lot of collaborative teamwork. Jude Fitzpatrick, one of our staff members, always says, no team, no dream, and that's the way the finance department is working. A lot of people's input in the work, and I want to thank all of them. And I also want to thank you guys because you've all been very helpful in the process and gone through it. I appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for your efforts personally, and thank you as well, Mrs. Gardner, for your efforts, as well as the entire finance team on the town side, as well as, I think it'd be remiss if we didn't include the Board of Ed side for their efforts, Mr. Menzel and the people that did that work.
Right.
Mr. Tetro, thank you to your administration as well for all the hard work. Does anybody have anything else to say on that? Seeing none, we'll go to Mr. Michelangelo, who's got an easel, and as I teased him earlier, whenever I see him with an easel, I know it costs us money, so.
Hopefully tonight won't be that case.
All right, so, item number 2 on the agenda is the Director of Public Works to hear and consider and act upon a resolution recommended, whereas federal monies are available under the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program administered by the State of Connecticut Department of Housing pursuant to Public Law 93-383 as amended, and whereas pursuant to Chapter 127C and Part 6 of the Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, the Commissioner of Housing is authorized to distribute such federal monies to local municipalities. And whereas it is desirable in the public interest that the town of Fairfield accept from the state a grant in the sum not to exceed $560,000 in order to undertake a Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Tranche 1 project, Pine Creek Culvert Upgrade, and to execute an assisting agreement thereof, should one be offered. Now therefore, be it resolved that the town of Fairfield is cognizant of the conditions and prerequisites for the state assistance imposed by Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes and the acceptance of the town of Fairfield as a disaster recovery community development block grant to be used for the Pine Creek Culvert upgrade in an amount not to exceed $560,000 is hereby approved. And further resolved that the first selectman is hereby authorized to, on behalf of the town of Fairfield, to accept and expend said grant. And further resolved, the first selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to execute any and all necessary documents to secure said grant. Do I have a second for that, or can we put that in front of us? Mrs. Leclerc, move it in front of us. Mr. Brown, can you second that? And I never want to read that again. So, go ahead, Mr. Michelangelo. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. The first one before us is the $560,000 grant, and it's for improvements to the existing tide gate on Pine Creek. And I can explain what the project's for and the benefits of it. And just, after Storm Sandy, our reaction was to literally fish for every possible grant opportunity we could through FEMA, Army Corps, National Fish and Wildlife. And surprisingly, and I wouldn't have told you this 2 years ago, but the HUD, Department of Housing, Housing Urban Development, Community Development Block Grant, has been the most successful avenue. So this is 100% grant funded in its entirety. The only out-of-pocket cost is town staff. And if this board is familiar with the way our dike system works, there's an existing dike, just to orient ourselves, of course, Long Island Sound, Reef Road, Richard White Way, our wastewater treatment plant. There's an existing dike over there which has been in existence for probably about 60 years. And what that does, and there's a pipe going through that. So what that does, great system, that allows our Long Island Sound to come up Pine Creek and feed these marshes twice a day during high tide. So both the marsh on Reef Road, Roland, Lally up to Penfield, even thus one by Long Dean. So those are viable saltwater marshes. Twice a day the tide comes in, tide goes out, tide comes in, tide comes in. The system works perfectly. It's regulated by one 48-inch pipe. Works perfectly, except during an event like Storm Sandy, when Fairfield all at once, the equation is broken. Fairfield all at once gets flooded, and instead of this doing the job that I mentioned, it serves as a impedance to the water being drained out. So that's why one of our things we were doing, that was one of our key locations during Storm Sandy, was to literally locate pumps over here and pump it over the tide gate. So what this would do is leave, well, in addition to one 48-inch pipe, it will put another 48-inch pipe and two 60-inch pipes. So we literally increase our capacity by 5-fold. So this way, if in the event Fairfield gets inundated, turns into a saltwater pond, we could open up the floodgates literally and drain the water by gravity without mechanical means much faster. And once again, it's still somewhat tide dependent, but we had some studies done and it's about a 24-hour cycle to get the water out of there. And then after the water's out of there, if you are allowed to, you go back to your 148-inch tide gate. That works the same way it works today for into the future. So that's the reason for the project, justification for it. Once again, 100% funded, so we're just accepting the money, authorizing the money, spending it down, getting it reimbursed.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Mr. Walsh?
Joe, explain the engineering. If a storm like Sandy comes in, do the floodgates stay closed to prevent water from flooding in there?
Yes, they would.
Okay.
Yeah, so not only would the additional floodgates remain closed, the tide gate, just as we did with Sandy, we'd batten down the hatches, and even that one we'd secure, so that doesn't let any water come into it.
So you try to prevent everything from coming in during the high tide area when it's coming in,
Correct.
but then still some water is getting in somehow.
Those
Because of
are,
the surge and
yeah,
stuff.
they're not meant to be waterproof
Yeah.
devices, but for the most part, water will come in through,
Other ways.
it'll crash it.
Okay, and then after the tide goes down, you open up these flood, all of them now,
Correct, yep,
and gravity feeds it back out
Yep.
to clear it out as fast as possible.
yep.
Okay,
So within 1.5 tide cycles, it would all be out.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Brown?
Joe, can you just explain to us the money trail here? 560,000 starts with the Federal Housing or Urban Development, and just, how does just explain the trail.
Yeah, well, the federal agency is HUD, Housing or Urban Development, which gets administered by the state agency. So the Department of Housing is the one that administers community development block grants. So the town generally gets these generic grants on the order of 100,000, several hundred thousand a year, which we use in targeted areas for different type of improvements. I know like the area by me, Hunyadi or Rakosi, we're able to pave a lot of those roads. A lot of the handicap improvements we're going to be doing, Burmanton, stuff like that, is general community development block grant funds. These were specific, so these are community development block grant / disaster relief. So specifically targeted as a result of Storm Sandy. So, and this is, and I've been in municipal government for almost 30 years now. This is the first time it's come down the pike in my 30 years. Even the people we're dealing with at the Department of Housing in Hartford, this is their first one too. So there's some learning curve involved, but it's that's where it comes from.
So from the federal government to the to the state of Connecticut to Fairfield.
Correct.
And when do we get our money?
It's a rolling program, so it's similar to like the way we do our bridge program. So you don't have to complete every last thing. So if when we incur $100,000 worth of invoices, we submit it for reimbursement. So
Okay.
it's a rolling program.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Just,
Which
how
one?
would we hire somebody to do this work, or we do it in-house?
Well, we're going to hire a design firm to
Yeah.
design the project
Yeah.
and go out to bid, public bid to do it. And everything is encompassed under the $560,000. The only thing that's not reimbursed is my time, Laura Pooley's time.
Mr. Walsh, do you have a follow-up?
No, thank you.
I have a question on that. So this has not, here's my question. How do we know it's going to cost $560,000?
We've had some engineering estimates done. One of the things that we had done, that the 40-inch pipe, 8-inch pipe, did have some damages during Storm Sandy. So we had to rebuild that. So we've had some engineering work done, preliminary engineering work done to design it. So we've got a pretty decent schematic design that has an idea of the quantities involved. So we know the lengths of pipe, the diameters of pipe, amount of cubic yards and stuff. So
Let me ask you a question. Let me put it another way, and I'm glad to know all that. We have had some issues recently with thinking that we've had good designs, good upfront work done for projects, and they have seemingly always ended up back at this board for additional money, right? What's the process like now, if that happens here? Can you scale back the project? Can you work with the project on that 560 to get something done that'd help the situation? You understand I don't know that I articulated that well. but-
yeah, no, I understand, and I would say there may be stuff we could scale back, but there aren't a lot of variables involved. So when you design these things, they have big concrete walls, the face of them. There's going to be a dike over. So I'm supposed there's decisions we can make.
Mr. Michelangelo's, another way, what came first, the 560 from the government or the project that said we need the 560?
We're the ones that came up with the 560.
Okay.
So we did the calculations to get to the 560.
Okay, so potential that if you come back and it's 700, you can go back to them?
Potentially, but once again, I don't see us going
new
down
process.
that.
Okay.
And when I say potentially is that, there was a couple rounds of this money that was allocated, one in the summer, one right before Christmas, and one of the end results is that not all communities will go through with all their funds, so with their projects. So there is their anticipation that there will be another pot of money for us to pursue, but most likely, hopefully, we'd be pursuing them for new and different projects and not for underestimating this project.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Seeing none, I'm going to call this item for a vote. And if you would allow me not to have to read this entire thing again.
Waive the reading, yes.
Waive the reading? Do I have a second? All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read it like this. On June 19, 2014, the town of Fairfield was awarded the above referenced project, which is the CDBG-DR Pine Creek Culvert Upgrade from the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Relief Program. These funds were made available as a result of Storm Sandy. These are federal housing and urban development funds administered by the Connecticut Department of Housing, and the total amount is $560,000. This would accept those funds and authorize the first selectman on behalf of the town to accept and expend said grant, and further resolve that the first selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to execute any and all necessary documents to secure said grant. Everybody okay with that? All in favor of this project? Opposed? Abstentions? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Michelangelo. I will, just for official reasons, read item number 3, and then we'll vote on that after the fact, if you guys would allow me not to have to bore you with reading it again. To hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director of Public Works. Whereas federal monies are available under the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program, administered by the State of Connecticut Department of Housing pursuant to Public Law 93-383 as amended. And whereas pursuant to Chapter 127C and Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, the Commissioner of Housing is authorized to disperse such federal monies to local municipalities. And whereas it is desirable and in the public interest of the town of Fairfield, accept from the state a grant in the sum not to exceed $500,000 in order to undertake a community development block grant disaster recovery tranche 1 project, repair of Penfield Pavilion, and to execute an assistance agreement therefore, should one be offered. Now therefore be it resolved that the town of Fairfield is cognizant of the conditions and prerequisites for state assistance imposed by Part 6, Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, and the acceptance by the town of Fairfield of a disaster recovery community development block grant to be used for the repair at Penfield Pavilion in the amount not to exceed $500,000 is hereby approved, and further resolved that the first selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to execute any and all necessary documents to secure said grant. Someone move this before us? Mr. Brown, second. Mrs. Leclerc, this is now before us. So this is the state piece of the reimbursement of Penfield.
Correct, so it's the same program, Community Development Disaster Relief. There was a small pot of money statewide, approximately $2 million set aside for public facilities, so a very small competitive pot. We applied for $500,000 for this rebuilding of Penfield Pavilion, and this is the same $500,000 that we've talked about in the Penfield presentation, Penfield Pavilion presentation, and the whole financing of it. $500,000 outright grant for the reconstruction of the pavilion.
I think this should be an appropriate time to ask a question about the federal funds on this. There was a newspaper article today, I believe, that appeared online on this. Would somebody please address that briefly about what's going on with the FEMA reimbursement there? I think we're all familiar with the 500 on this, correct? Is that, am I jumping to conclusions here, Mr. Walsh?
What?
The 500 from the state we're familiar with from the economic analysis.
Yes.
So would we all like to hear about what's going on with the FEMA reimbursement?
I haven't seen any newspaper articles, so I'm not sure what you're referencing.
So there was an electronic article today saying that the town is still, what the presumption was of the article, that the town is still at loggerheads with FEMA over the reimbursement percentage on Penfield.
I'm trying to remember, there was some discussion about what the issues were when we were in the process. I drafted a letter which I issued, and you all familiar with that
Correct.
letter?
Has there been any more
Right.
information?
Since that time, I was just trying to make sure we're all on
Yep.
the same base of information. So since, if you remember, the summary of that was that there were differences, and we were doing our best to accelerate. There's a lady named Amy Lapos, who works out of Congressman Hines' office, who's kind of the federal delegation who's taking the lead on this. We had a telephone call with FEMA, the state, ourselves, and our consultants, Whit O'Brien. That was maybe, God, it's been almost 2 months now. In that call, we all agreed that we were going to have a workshop where we all sit down, lay out all the numbers, where our calculations, the FEMA's calculations, the state calculations, and try to reconcile them. It was suggested by Ms. Lapos that FEMA bring in a designated hitter, so to speak, a contractor who is expert, because our region, Region 1, doesn't get a lot of this type of activity, so there's not a lot of FEMA expertise in this region. So the idea was to go out and hire what they call a TAC, a Technical Assistance Coordinator. They anticipated that effort was going to take 3 weeks to identify and hire someone, get someone aboard. It took longer than that. That hiring is executed this week. I think the papers have probably been signed. If not, they'll be signed tomorrow, but it's my understanding they were signed yesterday, or today would be signed yesterday or today. So the next step then is to open up the pipeline of information among FEMA, the town, and this person, the TAC person, who have not met yet. And after this full exchange of information, we will have the workshop, and we're in the process of setting up scheduling that workshop.
Who's paying for the TAC?
FEMA.
So, and that doesn't get charged back to the project or
Correct.
to us in any way?
Correct. And so, now, and repeating also now, the whole purpose of this is so the town qualifies for the 50% rule. If you remember, qualifying for the 50% rule makes it pretty straightforward with respect to going ahead with our current $6.028 million project. If it turns out we don't qualify for the 50% rule, just kind of repeating some of the past rules, you maybe not remember. Then what we do is we take each individual, we have the construction, which is a given, but then the mitigation pieces would then have to be submitted and reviewed upon individually. Whereas if we satisfy the 50% rule, they're all approved, carte blanche.
Questions from board members? Mr. Mayor, when this originally came before us, and we talked about everything, there were, and obviously there's no guarantees in life, but Whit O'Brien was pretty confident, I have the name right, of the
Yes.
consulting firm. So they are the foremost experts, or one of the foremost experts.
Yeah, right.
And what is their level of confidence now? Because this seems to have dragged on longer than I think it was assumed.
Yeah, no, it's just, they still, I mean, it's like, I was actually on the phone today with the state, there was 5 all the expenses that the town incurred are divided up into projects, and each project ends up with a PW number. And we have maybe, I don't know, 10 PW numbers on like the capital side, some of which are fairly minor, like dredging, some other issues, right? Then we have the Penfield one, which is very large. We have 5 PWs that are on the general fund side. One was debris cleanup, one is emergency services. Those are both over $1 million. And then there's 3 others, one for $59,000, one for $14,000, and one for $9,000. The one for debris cleanup, we submitted an initial billing, or recorded an initial receivable of like $1 million, say $1.2 million, say $1.1 million, just to pick a number, and we got like $1.3 million. So we ended up favorable. There's an emergency service PW, number 663, which is in there for $1,096,000. And I've been busy with the budget. I haven't had a chance to focus on it, but I was in the state today, like, where is this money? So yeah, things are just amazingly slow. Now the budget's over, I'm going to be taking that extremely hard. But Will O'Brien is still confident in their numbers. And we'll find out soon.
So they haven't cautioned or said, hey, this is taking,
They pretty much, and the congressional, I mean, I don't want to say anything negative about anybody, but I guess the fact is that this region is just not used to big projects. And there's policies, there's procedures, there's definitions, and there's interpretation. And if you look at all the information we have from FEMA, and Joe, correct me where if I go off base here, they kind of keep looking for engineering estimates. What's it really going to cost? What's this? Whereas policies and procedures, you basically perform some software analysis on the type of structure, the facility, the size, et cetera. It's called the RS means test. And there's a whole regulation that defines how to go about this, how you use it, et cetera, et cetera. And Will O'Brien assures us that, they're 100%, they've done it. They've done it in Dallas, they've done it in Louisiana, they've done it, in Houston, they've done it everywhere. And they're very confident in their numbers. So we got 2 different methodologies that come up with, the feds come in at like 49 point something percent. WIP came in at 63?
I think it was higher.
Yeah, I think 69% or something like that. So we have this 20-point gap. So we really only have to get them to move less than 1%. So they're confident, but like I've said since the very beginning, they're my source, and I read all the material diligently and I try to follow it, and I do understand the rules. I've read the regulations. It seems pretty clear that the RS means test is the way they're supposed to go, and they're supposed to respond to it. They've never responded to that directly. So that's where we are.
Does anybody have any follow-up questions on that? I just wanted to make sure it was out there because it was in the press
Yeah.
today, and since this item was on the agenda. Does anybody have any questions, comments on the $500,000 directly? Mr. Walsh?
How confident do we feel that we can get the 500? We're in competition with other communities, correct? There's only a $2 million pot.
No, the 500,000 has been awarded.
Oh, it has been awarded.
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
okay. So
We're
it's formally
accepting,
awarded.
we're accepting this.
Okay, okay.
Any other questions?
Could I-
Please.
Was that 500 part of our approval for
Yes.
Penfield?
Yes.
All right. Seeing no more questions, comments, I'm going to call this item for a vote. I'll do it the same way as last time.
Do you have,
Uh,
it's already before us, right?
It's before us. I guess I can just call it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. All in favor of accepting this? Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Thank you for the help there. Saved us a lot of time. All right. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you. Please, if you have any additional information that comes forward on that in the next few days, because I know now that the budget's over, this is an area of focus for you. We do have our meeting next week, so to the extent that you have any update for that,
Got it.
thank you, sir. All right. Item number 4, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director of Public Works. Whereas federal monies are available under the Community Development Block Disaster Recovery Program, and administered by the State of Connecticut Department of Housing pursuant to Public Law 93-383 as amended. And whereas pursuant to Chapter 127C and Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, the Commissioner of Housing is authorized to disperse such federal monies to local municipalities. And whereas it is desirable in the public interest that the town of Fairfield accept from the state a grant in the sum not to exceed $225,000 in order to undertake a community development block grant disaster recovery tranche 2 project, shoreline resiliency improvements at Penfield Beach, and to execute an assistance agreement therefore, should one be offered. Now therefore be it resolved that the town of Fairfield is cognizant of the conditions and prerequisites for state assistance imposed by Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes and the acceptance of town of Fairfield of a disaster recovery community development block grant to be used for the shoreline resiliency improvements at Penfield Beach in the amount not to exceed $225,000 is hereby approved, and further resolved that the first selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to execute any and all necessary documents to secure said grant. A motion to put this before us, Mr. Brown, second by Mrs. Leclerc. The item is before us. Please, Mr. Michelangelo.
And this is funding that was also accounted for in the Penfield approval process. So in the fall of 2014, when the next round of community development block grant became available, this was not 100% funded. This was at the 75% level. And this time, there was no money for public facilities. So one of the things we did in looking at all of Fairfield and the myriad of projects we had, one of the projects we identified as a good candidate was the fortification of the bulkhead at Penfield Pavilion, which by that time, the design was pretty much along the way. So we sort of knew the way things were coming, and we had the design from DeStefano Chamberlain. So we submitted a project for the fortification of our existing bulkhead, which is the gray part there. So even though this is not a public facility, it's for improvements on the site. So that's how we're able to skin the cat. And it's the same 75% ratio as we would get from FEMA. But if you look at our whole FEMA package, and one of the things that, Bob has said this before, that, the reimbursement rate for FEMA is 75%. So that is always 75%. The fly in the ointment is that things may get thrown out to reduce the pocket. So in looking at all Penfield Pavilion, one of the items that was probably most at risk of getting thrown out was this fortification of the bulkhead. There could have been a legitimate argument, but FEMA was, that's not part of the building at all. It didn't get damaged in the storm. Substantially, you're not fixing the damage. So that's why we submitted it. We felt it was a good project. And in a way, it secured a portion of our Penfield funding. So that's what we're here for today, to formally accept this.
From the state.
Correct.
Do we have any questions on this item? And this was part of the Penfield Pavilion project.
Correct.
So this is once again accepting a slice of the funding for that that's been approved.
Yep.
Comments, questions, concerns from board members? Mr. Walsh?
Joe, when we were looking at this, was this 225 in the works at that point? Was the request for this 225 in the works at that point in time? When we were first looking at this, because I remember you started grading what the riskiest reimbursement
Correct.
sections were, and
Yep.
that was the riskiest, you said.
Correct, yes. Yes.
So is this a new grant, or is this one that's always been based in the financing and how we're going to finance it?
This was based in the financing. So we secured this, I don't know if the award, we secured this like the week before Christmas.
Okay.
So this was a known quantity when we were making our decisions in the early part of 2015. So it was in all of Bob's calculations and everything presented to all the different boards.
All right. Everyone all set on this? I'm going to call this for a vote then. All in favor of accepting this grant? Opposed, abstentions, that item carries. Thank you. Item number 5, to hear, consider, and act upon the following resolution as recommended by the Director of Public Works. Whereas federal monies are available under the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Program, administered by the State of Connecticut, the Department of Housing pursuant to Public Law 93-383 as amended. And whereas pursuant to Chapter 127C and Part 6 of Chapter 30 of the Connecticut General Statutes, the Commissioner of Housing is authorized to disperse such federal monies to local municipalities. And whereas it is desirable and in the public interest that the town of Fairfield accept from the state a grant in the sum not to exceed $74,500 in order to undertake a community development block grant disaster recovery tranche 1 project, WPCF sanitary sewer outfall repair, and to execute an assistance agreement thereof, should one be offered. Now, therefore, it is resolved that the town of Fairfield is cognizant of the conditions and prerequisites of state assistance imposed by Chapter 6 of Chapter 30, or Part 6 of Chapter 130 of the Connecticut General Statutes, and the acceptance of the town of Fairfield of a disaster recovery community development block grant to be used for the WPCF sanitary sewer outfall repair in the amount not to exceed $74,500 is hereby approved, and further resolved that the first selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to accept and expend said grant, and further resolved that the first selectman is hereby authorized on behalf of the town of Fairfield to execute any and all necessary documents to secure said grant. I put this before us, Mr. Brown, seconded by Mrs. Leclerc. The item is before us. Mr. Michelangelo, please.
Okay. From our wastewater treatment plant, there is a discharge line which goes into Long Island Sound, and it's in the same area as that hump tide gate, so I'll just superimpose it here. And it goes into Long Island Sound like that. And that's where all the sanitary sewer waste that's discharged to the plant and treated to the plant ends up. And for a portion of the time, it flows by gravity into Long Island Sound, but twice a day during the high tide, it gets pumped up to a tower to give it enough head to push it into Long Island Sound. But one of the things that we're having after Sandy is, and once again, it's all subterranean, it wasn't behaving the way we expected it to behave. The pressure was off, flow wasn't getting out there quite the way it should, flow meters affected, so we even had ships, that goes about a third of a mile into Long Island Sound. We have even had ships and divers check out the opening. U.S. Army Corps did some sonar out there. So we did some investigative type stuff. And the cause of the problem was just south of Fairfield Beach Road. There's a little gap in the pipe. And this is 30-inch concrete pipe, probably around 12 feet down in sandy soil, so it's not the easiest place to access to figure out what's going on. But we did some investigative work, we did figure it out. That's where the problem is. We need to get down there and do a construction repair, basically to Band-Aid the pipe, wrap the pipe so it acts as one continuous pipe, so nothing goes out of it at times and nothing comes into it at times. So once again, we had some preliminary engineering work done, we've put the price on it. This is 100% funded, so if we accept it, we'll draw the final engineering plans, go out to bid for it, and complete the project.
Questions from board members on this item? Mr. Walsh?
Was this damaged by the storm?
Yes, it was. Well, yes, it was, because the problem just arose after the storm. That was our case. You know, that question was asked by a number of people. And yeah, we didn't go looking for this problem. The problem came to us.
Okay.
Any other? Mr. Brown?
This money is guaranteed, right?
Correct.
All right. It's because in their letter to you, it says this letter is not a contract.
And they all say that, and we have to go. There's some permitting requirements, and they list the different hoops we have to jump through. And then once you do that, one of the, I think it says there, one of the steps we have to do is actually accept the money, complete all those 4-step things, and then you enter into an agreement with them, and you sign the contract.
Okay. So what is an assistance agreement? Because does it mean anything? It says that the state shall not be bound until an assistance agreement has been fully executed.
I think that's just the executed agreement between the town and the Department of Housing for these funds, for all of these projects.
All right.
They all.
I guess the point is the money's guaranteed, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, concerns from board members? Seeing none, I'm going to call this item for a vote. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Michelangelo, thank you and good luck with your projects.
Thank you.
Before we dismiss for the night, because that's the last agenda item, 3 brief topics to cover. Number one, typically at this meeting, we would be voting on an extension of the term for our board clerk, but we took care of that earlier. I just wanted to acknowledge that that comes due typically each May. Secondly, we would typically at this meeting as well speak to the auditor for the next fiscal year and vote on appointing the auditor for the next fiscal year. Ms. Leclerc, I'm going to ask that you convene the audit committee. Or yourself, I think, Mr. Brown and Mr. Mottola, I'd like to ask you to serve on that audit committee to come back to us with a recommendation for our June meeting.
Okay.
Can we do that on our audit firm? And third, and I'm going to look to Mr. Brown here, I think it's Mr. Brown, Mr. Stone, and Mr. DeWitt. It's time now to reconvene the budget subcommittee and do the postmortem on our budget process. And if I could ask you to do that, and also reach out to Mr. Tetra for a representative from the Board of Selectmen. What this is for our new members is at the end of each budget cycle, we ask the budget subcommittee to get together with input from all of us as we see necessary to say what did we like, what didn't we like, what would we like to change. It's actually been a very beneficial process for us. Each year, the budget process is run more and more smoothly, and we've been able to clean it up and decide on things as mundane as meeting times, as required stop times, as what type and format of presentations we want, whether we like the food choices or not, all those type of things.
More green drinks.
More green drinks, right. All get discussed in detail at this. And then we, last year, actually, I think the process got away from us a little bit, and the budget subcommittee met a little bit later, so we really didn't discuss it to the fall. But I think it's good practice for us to do it as soon as possible after the budget process.
That's why I hesitated, because we just did it, and I was thinking,
Yeah.
but the problem was we did it about 5 months too late. So we'll get that committee together, and I may ask some feedback and input from the rest of the board as well.
That'd be great.
And of course, Mr. Tetra, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Brown, and thank you, Mrs. Leclerc, for once again chairing the audit committee and all your hard work on that. Do we have any other questions, comments, or considerations? We do have yet another meeting next week, Tuesday evening, back in our same location, Board of Ed buildings for our quarterly review. So, anybody have anything? Seeing none, I'll accept the motion. I'll go with Mrs. Cook-Lippman, Mr. Becker, and all in favor of adjournment? Opposed, abstentions? Good night, everybody. Thank you. Jerry, all set?
I guess when the government's giving you money.
Last year, I got